Here's a short, powerful hook for, she smiled at me like I was already hers. Asterisk, the moment she smiled at me, something shifted, like I'd been hers all along, even before I knew it. Asterisk, if you want, I can give 5 more hook variations that are equally gripping for YouTube shorts or video thumbnails. Do you want me to do that? It was an ordinary evening, the kind that felt like any other, until she appeared. I noticed her the instant she stepped into the room. Not because of anything flashy, but because of the quiet authority in the way she moved. There was a grace in her stride, a calm confidence that made people unconsciously step aside, yet she didn't demand attention. It was subtle, magnetic. Her hair caught the soft light, glinting like strands of copper, and even from across the room, the warmth of her presence seemed to draw the air closer, as if space itself bent toward her. I couldn't stop watching. There was something in the way she held herself, shoulders relaxed, chin lifted just slightly, a small, almost imperceptible tilt of her head that suggested she was both curious and amused. When our eyes met, though only for a heartbeat, a rush went straight through me, like someone had turned up the volume on a part of my chest I didn't know existed. Her smile wasn't wide or demanding. It was knowing, the kind that seemed to acknowledge something in me I hadn't yet seen in myself. And yet, it wasn't flirtation in the ordinary sense. It was something deeper, warmer, entirely unexpected. As I lingered near her, I found myself acutely aware of details I normally ignored. The soft hum of the room seemed to fade, leaving only the faint, sweet scent she carried, delicate and grounding at the same time. I noticed the subtle way her fingers grazed the rim of the glass she held, how the light caught her eyes and made them seem to flicker with unspoken stories. My own hands felt heavier, my pulse louder, as though my body recognized the connection before my mind could put words to it. A small brush of her hand against mine as she reached for a book on the nearby table sent a shock of warmth through me, lingering far longer than it should have. It was innocent, almost casual, but in that instant, I felt the pull of something profound, something I couldn't yet name. I wanted to speak, to say something clever or meaningful, but words felt clumsy and inadequate. All I could do was watch, heart quietly thudding, as she laughed softly at something across the room, the sound low and rich, wrapping itself around me. There was hesitation, too. I caught myself wondering if I should approach, if it was appropriate, if I was reading too much into the simple motions of a stranger's evening. But the hesitation only heightened the tension. I was drawn to her, undeniably, inexplicably, and every instinct in me whispered that this moment, this first glance, this quiet, unassuming smile, was the beginning of something neither of us could fully anticipate. By the time I forced myself to look away, I carried the memory with me. The warmth of her presence, the subtle brush of her hand, the quiet certainty in her eyes. And in the back of my mind, an unsettling, thrilling thought lingered. That smile wasn't just for me, it was about me. It was the kind of recognition that made you wonder if perhaps, somehow, she had always known I would be here, and that I might belong to her in ways I didn't yet understand, that I never expected a few words could feel like gravity. But as soon as she spoke, it was as if the world subtly shifted around us. It started with something ordinary, a comment about the music playing softly in the background. Yet her voice carried warmth and a quiet authority that made even the simplest sentence feel important. There was a smooth rhythm to it, a teasing lilt that made me want to lean in closer, not because I needed to hear the words better, but because I didn't want to miss the way they left her lips. I found myself noticing the little things. The way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed, the soft brush of her hair behind her ear, the faint scent of her perfume, earthy and floral all at once, lingering in the space between us. Even the casual tilt of her head suggested she was listening fully, absorbing not just my words, but the pauses between them, the hesitation in my tone. And when she smiled, just for a moment, it was like sunlight slipping through clouds, warm, unexpected, and entirely disarming. Our conversation lingered in those unspoken moments, too. A pause stretched longer than necessary. Yet it didn't feel awkward. It felt charged, a subtle acknowledgement that neither of us wanted the moment to end. I brushed my fingers lightly against the edge of the table, and somehow, the briefest contact with hers, as she shifted to reach for her drink, made the air between us almost electric. It was a touch that meant nothing by itself, and yet, in context, it said everything. I tried to focus on what I was saying, but it was impossible to ignore the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence that made her every gesture seem deliberate and effortless. And still, there was softness beneath it, a hint of vulnerability in the way her eyes flickered when she recounted a small personal story, or when she laughed self-consciously at something trivial. It made her human in the most compelling way, a delicate balance between strength and openness that drew me in further than I expected. There was hesitation on my part, too. I was painfully aware of the difference in our ages, the invisible barrier it might represent, yet it felt meaningless in her presence. Instead, I focused on the way her gaze seemed to hold mine just a second too long, the way her laugh resonated deep in my chest, the way the room seemed to shrink until it was just the two of us. Every instinct in me told me to speak, to find some clever line to express the pull I felt, yet words felt inadequate. Instead, I let my attention linger on her, on the subtle signals that suggested she felt it too. By the end of our brief exchange, I was acutely aware of something shifting between us. It wasn't a declaration, and it wasn't a promise. It was the faint spark of recognition, a sense that we had noticed each other in a way that mattered. As she moved away, her smile lingered in my mind, warm and knowing, and for the first time, I realized that attraction wasn't always immediate or loud. Sometimes it was quiet, measured, and utterly undeniable, building slowly in the spaces between words, touches, and glances. And in that quiet space, I couldn't help but wonder, had she felt it too? That silent, unspoken connection, the kind that made even ordinary conversation feel like the beginning of something extraordinary. Over the next few days, our interactions grew less like chance encounters and more like a quiet rhythm, small shared moments that felt heavier than their simplicity suggested. It started with a casual coffee break, then a walk through the park, the air crisp and fragrant with autumn leaves. Each time we were near, the world seemed to shrink, leaving just the two of us in a bubble of warmth and quiet fascination. I noticed the subtle way she moved, the way her coat fell perfectly around her shoulders, how she brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear without thinking, the way her laughter, soft but genuine, seemed to settle into the spaces around me like sunlight spilling over a dark corner. We discovered little things in common, a love for the same music, an appreciation for odd, fleeting moments of beauty, the way we both savored silence when conversation lulled. And yet, even in these mundane discoveries, there was a growing tension, a pull that neither of us tried to name aloud. When we walked side by side, our shoulders would brush, occasionally intentionally, occasionally not, each touch sending a quiet shiver up my spine. The warmth of her hand, near mine, felt like a grounding force, something soft yet thrilling, a constant reminder of her presence. One afternoon, we found ourselves on a bench by the water, the sun low and golden, reflecting in ripples that danced between us. She leaned back, letting the light touch her face just right, and I couldn't stop looking. There was a gentle openness to her, an ease that made her seem simultaneously untouchable and profoundly accessible. I wanted to say something, to reach out and close the space between us, but I stayed still, content to watch the small rise and fall of her chest, the curve of her smile as she told a story that made her eyes sparkle with mischief. There was intimacy in the silences, too. When words failed, a shared glance or a quiet laugh filled the space, weighted with meaning neither of us fully acknowledged. At one point, I noticed her hand resting near mine on the bench. I didn't move, but I felt the warmth radiating from her skin, the subtle rhythm of her pulse against the wooden surface beneath us, and I realized how deeply I had begun to notice her. Not just her presence, but the way she made the world feel softer, more alive, just by being near. Still, there was hesitation. I was acutely aware of the age gap, the world's expectations, the unspoken rules that told me to keep my distance. But every time she smiled at me, laughed at something I said, or let our hands nearly touch, that caution dissolved, replaced by a quiet certainty that I wanted to be close to her. She seemed to notice it too. The way her gaze lingered a second longer, the way she tilted her head as if listening to more than my words, the way she occasionally brushed against me, almost casually, but never without meaning. By the time the day ended, I felt something stirring in both of us. A fragile, thrilling intimacy, a sense that we were quietly building something deeper than either of us had expected. It wasn't spoken yet, but it didn't need to be. The way she moved, smiled, and shared these moments was already a conversation, one written in gestures, glances, and unspoken understanding. And in the warmth of those shared moments, I realized I wanted more time, more closeness, more of the quiet connection that made every ordinary second feel extraordinary. The shift was almost imperceptible at first. One moment, our interactions were light and effortless, like a gentle current carrying us together. The next, something in the air changed, heavier, more deliberate. It happened on a quiet afternoon, the kind where the sun hangs low, spilling golden light across everything it touches. We were working on a small project together, our bodies angled toward the same table, the air filled with the faint rustle of papers and the occasional clink of a coffee cup. As we reached for the same folder, our hands brushed, an innocent touch, nothing more than a fleeting coincidence. And yet, the warmth of her fingers lingering against mine made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. I caught her eyes immediately, startled by the intensity of the silent acknowledgement passing between us. Her gaze was steady, unflinching, yet softened with something unspoken, as if she knew exactly the effect she had on me. The moment lasted just a heartbeat, but the aftershocks stretched far longer, echoing in the quiet of my mind. We continued side by side, and every small motion carried weight. She leaned closer to examine a detail on the page, her shoulder brushing against mine, and I felt the heat of her presence in a way that was both thrilling and grounding. I tried to focus on the task, but my attention kept straying to the curve of her smile as she explained something, to the soft rhythm of her voice, to the subtle warmth radiating from her hand as it rested near mine. Even ordinary gestures became charged with a quiet intimacy, each glance and movement hinting at something neither of us had yet named. There was an unspoken tension, too, a hesitation that hovered between us like a delicate thread. I was aware of the age gap, of the expectations of the world, of the fragile barrier between friendship and something more. But in that golden afternoon light, those thoughts felt distant and irrelevant. All that mattered was the way she looked at me, the way she allowed her presence to brush against mine without retreating, as if daring me to acknowledge the connection I felt but hadn't yet spoken aloud. A pause in conversation left us sitting silently, shoulders nearly touching. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with the faint aroma of coffee, grounding me in the moment. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something that made my chest ache. Recognition, a quiet curiosity, and something softer, more vulnerable, hiding behind her confidence. I wanted to reach out, to close the small gap between us, to let her know the effect she had on me, but I stayed still, letting the tension build, letting the silence speak in ways words could not. By the time we stood to leave, the air had shifted irreversibly. Something had changed between us, a subtle acknowledgement that the attraction, the quiet pull, was no longer just a possibility. It was real, tangible, a current flowing beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise. And in the brief brush of her hand as she turned to leave, I felt it again. The warmth, the unspoken promise, the sense that neither of us could deny what was quietly building between you. It was during one of our quiet evenings together that the atmosphere shifted in a way neither of us could ignore. We were sitting on the couch, a soft lamp casting warm pools of light across the room. The hum of the city outside, a distant murmur. Conversation had dwindled into comfortable silence, and yet the tension between us had thickened, an almost tangible presence. I felt her shoulder lightly touch mine as she reached for a book, a small contact that sent a jolt through me. It wasn't deliberate, or perhaps it was, and the thought made my pulse race. She started speaking, almost hesitantly, her voice lower than usual, softer, carrying a weight I hadn't heard before. She talked about moments from her past, small regrets, choices that had left marks she didn't often share. Her gaze met mine intermittently, steady and unflinching, yet there was vulnerability in the way she looked away when her words faltered. I noticed every detail, the subtle quiver of her lips, the faint crease between her brows, the way her hands fidgeted slightly in her lap. It made her human in a way that was mesmerizing, raw, and utterly compelling. I listened, wanting to say something reassuring, something that might bridge the gap between her words and the unspoken connection thrumming between us. But words felt clumsy, inadequate. Instead, I let my presence speak for me, leaning slightly closer without realizing it, letting the warmth of my shoulder brush against hers. There was no rush, no forced closeness, just the quiet recognition that we were there, together, letting vulnerability exist without fear or judgment. When I finally spoke, it was a low confession of my own, not dramatic or rehearsed, just honest. I told her about the way her presence had become impossible to ignore, how her laughter, her quiet gestures, her fleeting touches lingered in my mind long after we parted. I admitted my hesitation, my awareness of the age difference, and the fear that I might be misreading signals, all while my hands itched to reach for hers, to close the small gap between us. She listened, her expression softening in a way that made my chest tighten. Then, in the quietest, most deliberate motion, she rested her hand near mine on the couch, almost touching, almost holding, and I felt the electricity of it pulse through me. It wasn't a declaration, but it was acknowledgement, the recognition of something mutual, something delicate yet undeniable. Her eyes, warm and steady, met mine, and in that gaze I saw understanding, curiosity, and the faintest hint of longing. The rest of the evening passed in a series of small, quiet gestures. A hand lingering near mine, a shoulder brushing mine, smiles exchanged without words. Each movement carried weight, meaning, an unspoken acknowledgement of the connection we were building together. For the first time, the attraction didn't feel confusing or forbidden. It felt possible, fragile yet real. And in that soft, intimate space, I realized something. Vulnerability had the power to break barriers, to deepen connection in ways words never could. In sharing pieces of ourselves without fear, we were creating something more than attraction. We were creating trust, intimacy, and the quiet certainty that this connection was worth exploring no matter the uncertainty of the world outside.